Can't pay your rent for June? Landlords and tenants, we've got advice for you. Hey there, Christian Walsh, Coldwell Banker Wire Associates. We specialize in multifamily, single family leasing in Orange County, California. And we're here for another monthly update on not being able to pay rent. We did one a month ago in April and one in March, a month before that. But there is good news this time because it looks like things are finally starting to thaw. Things are opening up. So we're slowly starting to see things change. June, we expect a lot more things to open up. There's good news from an income standpoint for those folks who need the help. So EDD, the state of California's unemployment department, is actually giving out the money now for the self-employed and the gig workers. A month ago, they had just started the process. Those funds are out now. So we're happy to report that for those folks that need those funds. More good news, there was more PPP funding for those very same people. So that payment protection loan that was out there for the self-employed gig workers and business owners, was funded with additional money, and those funds are getting out to people who need it. The stimulus payments, a month ago, most people hadn't received them. A lot of folks have, and there may be more stimulus and money coming into the economy here in the short term. So that's good news. But having said that, June will still be tough. Employment numbers, it's going to take a while to get those jobs back. Some jobs aren't coming back. Income levels, even if you're starting to work again in your job, you may not actually get income back to where it was pre-COVID for a while. So those are important considerations for landlords out there and tenants going through tough times. While things are starting to thaw, we still have a long way to go. So there may be some renters who are actually short for the first time in June. They figured out a way to make it happen in March and April and May, but now the funds have run out. So potentially they'll be behind in June. And there's plenty of folks who were maybe behind in April and May who worked out a plan with their landlord, and now they're yet again going to be short for June. So let's talk through some important points, some ways to get through these tough times. It's important for everybody to remember there are still no evictions. So there were, and this is all throughout the state of California, no evictions, and this actually applies to residential and commercial. So first we had some executive orders from Governor Newsom. Then the Judicial Council on April 6th said no more evictions will be started. And then local municipalities have adopted certain ordinances to prevent evictions. This does not waive the rent. The rent that wasn't paid still needs to be paid at some point in time, unless the landlord says they're going to waive it. But we'll go through that in a second. So that's an important point to remember. Evictions aren't happening, but that doesn't mean they won't happen at some point in time if a tenant doesn't start paying. So what are the options that a landlord and tenant can work out in order to get through this month and maybe a couple more ahead of not having the rent? So number one is waiving rent. There's nothing that says a landlord can't waive rent, which means that rent would not be due. That would not be back rent that needs to be paid back. Now, I understand this is difficult for most landlords to do. They are suffering as well. Everybody who's lost income as a renter, when that rent isn't paid, that's lost income for a landlord. So the landlord's going through the same thing. So this is not a possibility for everyone, and a tenant can't expect a landlord to waive rent. But that is one of the options, okay? Now we'll get into the more common options. Number two is a full forbearance of rent. What that means is the tenant is not going to be able to pay a penny for the monthly rent, so the landlord is going to work out a plan with the tenant to get that rent paid sometime in the future. But right now that rent will not be due for the coming month, and that's none of it. There's also a partial forbearance, and that's probably going to be the most common, and that would be the tenant can come up with X number of dollars, maybe half the rent, and then half of the rent is going to be deferred into the future on some sort of payment plan. The other way, number four, is to use some sort of forbearance plan and security deposit. So if there's any security deposit left and the landlord feels comfortable doing that, you can take, as a landlord, some of the security deposit and apply it to the rent. That rent would not then be due because it was paid for out of security deposit, but there's nothing that states a landlord can't ask for that security deposit to be replaced at some point in the future. So those are the ways to kind of work together on it. There's a few things, few additional notes that tenants and landlords need to be aware of. Tenants, you need to make sure that you reach out to your landlord and let him or her know that you're not going to be able to make the rent payment, whether it's even just missing a little bit. You got to get on the phone and you got to let him or her know. And then you're going to need to submit in writing. So whether it's an email, text, a letter, whatever is going to make the landlord feel comfortable, but it needs to be in writing that you're not going to be able to make the rent payment. So the other thing a tenant will need to do is keep whatever documentation they can to show how COVID-19 has affected their income. So it could be some sort of paperwork related to a job loss, demonstrating loss of hours. It could be a letter from a former employer. It could be medical expenses that have added up due to somebody having COVID-19 in the home. It could be the fact that there's a reduction in hours, or a reduction in hours because one of the renters has to stay home to take care of the kids. Because like my 4 kids are somewhere in this house right now on a Zoom call right now for school. So a lot of folks who are being deeply affected by this, it's because their kids are at home and there's nobody to watch them. And that, unfortunately, as things are opening up across California, schools are not. So it's something we're going to have to deal with. We are getting into June when school ends anyway, so it is what it is. So the other thing landlords and tenants need to work on is a mutually beneficial repayment plan. Now this is, you want to come up with something that's going to allow you to be repaid as a landlord, and something that's going to allow a tenant to actually make the payments. So this, I understand, this is the tough part. Everybody wants to be optimistic. Yeah, I'll get back on my feet. I'll be able to pay that back rent. But the longer you can spread it, and some municipalities like Los Angeles, they're requiring 12 months that a tenant can repay that. So the entire deferred amount is spread over 12 months. But the longer you can defer that or spread that out, and then that's going to allow the payments to just be a little bit extra beyond the rent. So that's what you're going to want to do, is come up with a mutually beneficial plan. Don't be overly optimistic. Don't expect July. If somebody hasn't paid April, May, and June, July, they're not going to give you 4 months worth of rent. That's not realistic. So come up with a mutually beneficial plan, and then both sides, landlord and tenants, get it in writing, get the plan in writing, both sides sign it, and we have a form you can reach out that you can use for that. But you must carefully document it. As I've said before, nobody's going to remember in 2 months. I can't even remember January 1st, what happened New Year's Eve this year. So the other important point is compassion and lack of judgment, and that's from both sides. A lot of people getting angry these days and frustrated. It's kind of like when I grew up in Ohio and you were stuck inside in the winter and you got no sunlight. I feel like there's something like that going on. But try to stay compassionate and try to just figure out, let's work together from both sides. So tenants understand that if you're losing income and you're not paying rent, your landlord is losing income. So the same stress you feel by losing income, they're going through as well. And vice versa, landlords realize that a lot of these tenants would love to pay you on time, but they're going through some tough times as well. So just look at it from both sides. So remember, as I've said before, this is not legal or tax advice. So you need to run everything I say by the appropriate professional, and we can connect you with some appropriate professionals if you need it. As a bonus, we've included a link found on nolo.com, which is one of the premier legal advice websites out there. They have an amazing breakdown on the state of California and some of the local municipalities related to evictions. So I've got that link down below, and you can also find some attorneys there that you can get answers from as well. But please leave your comments below. Let us know how things are going out there for you. Let us know if anybody's missing June, landlords, and same thing, tenants. Let us know if you're missing. But we're gonna get through this. We're on our way. We're making progress. Christian Walsh, Coldwell Banker Wire Associates. Remember, we're here to help. Subscribe down below and subscribe to our email newsletter where we keep all the data coming. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.